Chapter 2 of The Flying Stingaree by Harold Goodwin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Matt Berard. Chapter 2 The Flying Stingaree. Someone once said that the Chesapeake Bay looks like the deck plan of an octopus, but the mental image created by the phrase tells but a fraction of the story. Rivers and creeks empty into the bay by the dozens, and every river and most of the creeks have tributaries. Even some of the tributaries have tributaries. The result is thousands of miles of navigable waters, forming a maze of waterways that it would take most of a lifetime of weekend cruising to explore. The cruising houseboat Spindrift moved steadily across the mouth of one of the principal waterways of the eastern shore, the Choptank River. It was a good 3 miles across the river's mouth, and Rick occupied the time by reading aloud to Scotty, who was piloting. The Choptank River is navigable for large ships to the city of Cambridge, a principal eastern shore port. Yachts will find the river navigable for 20 miles beyond Cambridge, depending on their draft, while boats of shallow draft can cruise all the way into the state of Delaware. Rick paused in his reading and looked up. Be fun to go up one of these rivers to the source, wouldn't it? Maybe we can, Scotty replied. Read on. The name Choptank comes from the Choptank Indians, who lived in the area until the middle of the 19th century. These Indians were first discovered by Captain John Smith when he sailed into Chesapeake Bay in search of a location for what later became the Jamestown colony. "We're sailing through history," Scotty commented, "and we'd better step on it." He pushed the throttles forward. The houseboat accelerated to its top speed of about 12 miles an hour. "What's up?" Rick demanded. "Look to the southwest. That must be one of those Chesapeake Bay squalls the book warns about." There was a black line of clouds some distance away, but Rick could see that the squall line was moving fast, crossing the bay in their direction. He swung the chart table up and studied the situation. They were close to the south shore of the Choptank River now, and the chart showed no easily accessible place of shelter in the vicinity. They would have to run for the Little Choptank, the next river to the south. The chart showed several creeks off the Little Choptank. They could duck into the one nearest the river mouth. "Can we ride it out if we have to?" Rick asked. Scotty grinned. "We'll have to find out, if we have to. But I'd rather not be in open water when a squall hits this barge. It's not built for storms. Keep your fingers crossed and hope we get to cover before it hits." "I hear you talking. I'm going to do a little research." Rick ducked into the cabin and took the tide tables from the bookshelf. Back on deck, he leafed through the official publication and found that the nearest point for tidal data was the Choptank River Light, only a few miles away and clearly visible. High and low tides at the light were about 3 hours and 15 minutes earlier than Baltimore, the data station for the area. Rick checked Baltimore data for the date, subtracted quickly, and glanced at his watch. High tide in about a half hour. The chart shows 3 feet near shore at mean low water. High tide will bring it up to 4½ at the very least. That's plenty for this barge. Get inshore and cut corners. We won't have to stick to the channel." Scotty swung the wheel instantly, and the houseboat took a new course, leading them closer to shore. "Better keep an eye out for logs or pilings," Scotty warned. "No rocks in the area, so we don't have to worry about shoals." The wooded shore slid by, the trees gradually giving way to low scrub and marsh grass as they neared the mouth of the Little Choptank. Rick alternately kept an eye out ahead and checked their position on the chart. They were in about 5 feet of water, more than enough for the shallow draft houseboat. His principal worry was the outboard propellers. He didn't want to break one on a log that might be sticking up underwater. The squall was closer now, and the sky was growing dark. Rick estimated that they had no more than 10 minutes before the storm would hit. He had to look up at a sharp angle to see the storm front. Visibility was down to zero directly under it. Whitecaps in a roiling sea told him there was plenty of wind in the squall. He doubted that the houseboat could head into it successfully. The wind would catch the high cabin sides and force the houseboat onto the shore. Scotty swung around the northern tip of land that marked the mouth of the little Choptank. "We won't make it," he said, glancing at the chart. Rick nodded. "But the wind will be behind us. We can drive right into the mouth of the nearest creek. According to the chart, there's a cove just inside the mouth where we ought to be out of the wind." He put his finger on the place, and suddenly a chill ran through him. The nearest safe harbor was Swamp Creek, where Link Harris had vanished. There wasn't time to talk about it. He would have to be prepared to drop the anchor quickly. "I'm going up on the bow," he said. "Once into the creek, turn as hard as you can into the wind, then cut the power. I'll heave the anchor over and the wind pressure on the boat can set it. But keep the motors turning over in case it doesn't hold." "Got it," Scotty agreed. Rick stepped out of the cockpit onto the catwalk. The cabin top was just chest high, and he could hold on by grabbing the safety rails that ran along the sides of the large sun deck. He moved swiftly along the walk to the foredeck, a small semicircular deck used primarily for docking and anchoring. The anchor line was coiled on a hook on the curving front of the cabin, and the patent anchor was stowed on the deck itself. Rick took the coil and faked down the line in smooth figure eights so it would run out without fouling, then made sure the anchor was free and ready to go. When Rick stood up and looked down the length of the cabin top at Scotty, he saw that the squall was almost on them. The turbulent cloud front was directly overhead. He saw the wind line, marked by turbulent water, move swiftly toward the houseboat. The Spindrift rocked as though shaken by a giant hand, and its speed picked up appreciably. The houseboat began to pitch as the chop built up around it. Visibility dropped suddenly. It was almost dark. Rick winced as large, hard-driven raindrops lashed into his face. Then he turned his back to the storm and stared ahead. The creek mouth was in sight. He pointed to it for Scotty's benefit, but when he turned to look at his pal, the driving rain slashed into his eyes and made him look away. Scotty had seen the creek mouth. Staying as close to shore as he dared, Scotty drove the houseboat to within 50 yards of the narrow mouth, then swung the helm hard. The wind, which had been astern, was now abeam, and its force was acting on the high side of the boat. The houseboat slewed sideways, and for a moment Rick thought that they would be driven on to the upstream bank of the creek. But Scotty had judged his distance and wind pressure well. The boat shot into the creek mouth with feet to spare. The cove opened up ahead. Scotty reversed one motor and the houseboat turned almost in its own length. Rick watched the shore through squinting eyes, and the moment he saw the boat's forward motion cease, he dropped the big anchor over. The wind caught the houseboat again and drove it backward into the cove while the anchor line ran out. When he had enough line out for safety, Rick snubbed it tight around a cleat, held the taut line between thumb and forefinger until he was sure it had none of the vibrations caused by a dragging anchor, and then hurried back along the catwalk to the cockpit. He and Scotty ran from the rain-swept deck down the two steps into the cabin. For a moment, the two stood grinning at each other and listening to the heavy drumming of the rain on the cabin top. Then Rick spoke. "We'd better get out of these wet clothes so we can sit down. This may last for an hour or so." Scotty agreed. "First one into dry shorts makes the coffee." "That's me," Rick said. He stripped off the soaking clothes, toweled quickly, and put on dry shorts. The rain had chilled the air, so he reached into the drawer under the amidships bunks, took out a sweatshirt, and pulled it over his head. It felt good. Scotty had taken time to dry off the books and binoculars he had brought from the deck before he changed his own clothes. By the time he was dressed in dry shorts and sweater, Rick had the alcohol stove going and water heating for coffee. "Know where we are?" Rick asked casually. "Sure, we're—" Scotty stopped. "For Pete's sake, I didn't make the connection at first. We're in Swamp Creek, where that man got snatched by a flying saucer." "Right. Worried?" Scotty grinned. "Any flying saucer that can navigate in this weather is welcome to what it gets. How's the anchor?" "Holding," Rick said. "I hope." He looked out the galley window and watched the shore. It changed position as the boat moved, but that was only because the houseboat was swinging at anchor. "Seems all right," he added. 10 minutes later, coffee was ready. The boys sat at the dinette table and sipped with relish, listening to the storm outside. It seemed to be increasing in intensity. "Picking up," Scotty said. "The guidebook wasn't kidding when it said sudden and severe summer storms lash the bay." "Wonder how long they last?" Rick asked. "Hard to say. Perhaps an hour." The houseboat jerked suddenly. Rick jumped to his feet. "Did you feel that?" The boat heeled under the lash of wind. Rick peeled off his sweatshirt. "Feels as though the anchor dragged a little. I'm going out and let out more scope. We can't take a chance of drifting in this wind." "I'll go," Scotty offered. "No, I put the anchor down. It's my fault if it slips. Stand by." Rick pulled the cabin door open and winced at the blast of raindrops, like heavy buckshot on his face and body. For a moment he hesitated, then realized the sooner he got it over with, the better. He hurried to the catwalk and swung down it, meanwhile estimating his distances. He could let out another 50 feet of anchor line without getting the boat too near shore. The more anchor line out, the better the anchor could hold. He made the forward deck and looked around, realizing that the wind direction had changed and that the blast was now coming from the creek, swinging the houseboat around. That probably was why the anchor had shifted. He knelt and took the line in his fingers. It no longer seemed to be slipping, but it was better not to take a chance. He unloosened the half hitches that held it to the cleat, threw off all but one figure-8 turn, and let the anchor line run out slowly. When he estimated about 50 feet had run through, he put on more figure-8s around the cleat, then dropped half hitches over to secure the line. Once more he reached out and held the taut line. It didn't seem to be slipping. He pulled on it hard and felt the boat move. The anchor was in solidly this time. Rick turned and started back to the catwalk, rain lashing his back. Sudden instinct made him whirl around in time to see something huge and black rushing at him out of the storm. Rain blurred his vision. He had a swift impression of a black figure, shaped like a diamond, coming at him. He threw himself flat on the foredeck. There was a rustling sound overhead, and something clanged off the cabin top's aluminum rail. Rick was on his feet again. Heart pounding, he looked around. There was nothing but rain and wind. He stood upright and looked across the cabin top. For an instant, he glimpsed a black object above the canopy over the rear cockpit. Then that, too, was lost in the rain. Shaken, Rick made his way back to the cabin, entered, closed the door, and leaned against it. Scotty looked up and was on his feet in an instant. "Rick, what happened? You're white as a sheet!" he exclaimed. "Saw one," Rick managed. He was still shaking. "It went right over the boat. I think it hit the upper rail. We'll check later. But it wasn't a flying saucer. I'm sure of that." "What was it?" Scotty demanded. "A flying stingaree." End of Chapter 2.